Welcome back. In the next series of videos, what we're going to be doing is creating some extra prop models basically for our environment here. And let me show you what we're going to be doing next. We're going to come up here and open up an image file. And what I'm going to be picking up here is some images here of books. So I have here an image basically of a bookshelf with a whole bunch of just random books stacked in the bookshelf. Okay? That's what we're going to be creating for the entertainment center, where we're going to place the TV, just to add more detail and make the environment a little bit more realistic and believable. Okay, so we're going to be creating a series of books. I'm going to focus on this area here, these books right here. I'm basically going to use this image here for reference, and you can see the different kind of books we have to create. We have to create books that are kind of leaning over to the side a little bit at an angle. We have to create books that are just sitting there and going vertically straight up and down. We also have to create books that are short, tall. We have to create some that are very thin, like this one over here, as well as very thick and wide, like this big one right here and this other big one right here. So we have plenty of books here to create. So let's see how we can create this efficiently and quickly here in 3ds Max. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that. I'm going to go to my front view, and I'm starting off with a brand new scene, a nice clean slate here, okay? And then later I'll import everything into my final scene. So I'll go up here to my front view, and I'll go Alt-B and load up a reference image. And I'm going to use that same image that I just had as my reference image, match the bitmap, lock the zoom and pan, hit OK, and there we go. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to come into perspective view, and I'm going to create myself a box, and you can see in the front view there. Okay. Then I'm simply going to take this box in the front view. I'm going to place it about right here. So I'm going to choose this book right there in the background as sort of my starting point for creating my first book here. Alright, so it's a little bit hard to see, so I'll just make this thing viewable here. And I'm going to take the top of this book and I'm going to match it with the image up there. Right here we can see the top edge of the book. So I'm going to take the height, or not the height segments, the actual height. Take that up to about there, and it looks like I've already got the thickness there set up. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the perspective view, and this is what I have. Alright, let me go ahead and increase the length of this a little bit, something like that. It's pretty good. Okay, so it looks pretty much like the standard size of a book. Okay, so that's going to be my first book. And my pivot point is down here at the bottom, which is actually a really good thing. You'll see why in a moment. Okay, so once I have the volume set up for my book, what I'm going to do is convert it to an editable poly, and then I can start to edit this guy and do some things. Now, it already looks like the rough shape of a book here. It's just basically this really big cube. But what I'm going to do is to add just a little bit of detail to the sides that we're going to see. If I look at my reference image, we're going to be looking at the binders or the spines of the book. Okay, so basically that's where I want to put a little bit of added detail. Okay, right now it's just one flat polygon over here on the side. I don't want that, so I'm going to take the top and bottom edges, and I'm going to go ahead and connect that one time like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the edge in a little bit like this. Okay, just a subtle amount. And then I'm going to go to chamfer. I'm going to chamfer this out about that much. And I'm going to make it about maybe 3 segments. Okay, so it has a little bit of curvature in there. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. I'm going to select the corner edge on both sides right there. I'm going to lower that chamfer amount to give it a bit of a rounded edge back here like this. And I'm probably going to go for about 3 segments. Looks pretty good. Or you know what, maybe I'll go with 4. And I'll give it a very small amount of chamfer, because if I look at my reference image, I zoom in here, see how you can catch that highlight from the lighting coming from a window on the left? See that nice soft highlighting we can see right there? To imitate that in 3D, we'll create this nice, pretty big chamfered edge right there. Okay, so when I render that out, it looks nice and soft, and you can see there it's a little bit hard to see, but it's a pretty subtle effect. that chamfer we did in the spine of the book is actually going to make a pretty good difference with the lighting later on. So I'm going to hit OK. Now you can see here we need to retriangulate this polygon up here. So I'm just going to select all the polygons, come up here and retriangulate. Okay, so that's that problem is solved. Okay, so that makes the book look a little bit more believable, more realistic. Right, now if I go to the front view here, we can see we have a whole bunch of different sizes in books. So all I have to do is take this book here, okay, and I'm just going to make some clones here. So I'm going to clone this guy once here. I'm going to move him over to the side until it's barely touching the original book there. What we can do is just come in here and start to scale this guy down and change its size. So we can make a skinnier book, for example. I can come in here and I could make it a little bit skinnier on the Z. And a way to do that probably a little bit more precisely is open up the transform typing tool with the scale tool activated. And right now, if you're using the first scale option, which is the uniform scale, it's not going to work out too well. So switch to the second option, which is the non-uniform scale. And now you can go ahead and scale the Z-axis independently of the Y and the X. So I can go ahead and just make some very subtle changes to this. Make this book maybe a little bit shorter. Something like that. Now I can just come in here in my viewport and just move this book so it looks like it's kind of touching that one a little bit. And maybe I'll also scale it in the Y, something like that. Okay, so it's looking something like this. So that looks pretty good. And then what I could do is I could just go ahead and clone that guy right there. Make this guy a little bit shorter, just to add a little bit of detail to that. I can go ahead and bring this one in like this. What I actually did, I didn't scale it. I actually ended up moving it. Just got to watch out with that. Okay. And I'll just move it into position, like so. Okay, just make it touch right there. And maybe I'll make this one a little bit shorter. I'm also going to do something different here. I'm going to take this polygon in here, as well as these three polygons that I have here in the middle. And I'm going to pull these out like this to give it sort of bulge that comes outwards, like this. Okay, and that's going to make it look a little bit different. So basically, the idea is just to come in and create a variation of books. And it's made a lot easier when you have good reference image like this, a photograph of real life, so you can get an idea of the different types of looks that books can have. You know, skinny, tall ones, short, thick ones, really big, thick ones, and so on and so forth. So once we have a couple of books done here, we can actually go ahead and just start cloning this stuff, and placing these books next to each other. Maybe I'll make this one like so. Maybe I'll make this one a little bit taller like that. You can see as I render it starts to look a little more randomized and a little bit more believable. Okay, so I'm going to say I'm pretty happy with that. Now next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a book that's actually leaning over. If I look in my reference image, I can see that some of these books, like this one right here, the skinny one, is actually leaning over at a slight angle. And there's several books that are leaning over on it at a slight angle. Okay, and you can see clearly up here we have some books leaning over. So to get that kind of realism, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a book that's actually leaning over. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'll take this one right here, and I'm just going to make a clone of it. Okay. If I go to a front view and I turn on the grid and pretend like the floor is right here, if I rotate this, you can see that if this green line here was the floor, this book would end up going through the floor. So that's no good. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come over to here to my perspective view. Okay. I'm going to go to my pivot point. I'm going to grab that pivot point and I'm going to snap it to a vertex over here. And I ended up doing a clone there. Okay, so I snap it right there to that vertex. And now what happens is, if I go ahead and rotate the entire object, go back into the front view, it'll rotate properly, as you can see with the pivot point down there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use angle snap and maybe lean this over about, I could do it 10 degrees, and I can make some books lean over at 10 degrees, some can lean over at 5 degrees. So very subtle, small amounts will go really far and make a huge difference for you. So I'll lean this book over on this one like so. So it's basically just barely touching right there. And there you go. And I'm also going to go ahead and clone this guy. I'm going to make one that leans the other way. See that? So we're going to have books leaning one way and books leaning another way as well. So maybe this one I'll put over here. Have it leaning right there against that book. And then maybe I'll have another one leaning against this one. Okay. Alright, so you pretty much see how to create these books. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fast forward the video at this point, and I'm going to create a lot more books based on the technique that I've been using so far, because it is a bit of a time-consuming process to create these random looking books. So I'm going to fast forward the video, create some books. Go ahead and do that also yourself, and then I'll come back when I'm done, and we can get moving here. Okay, so I'm pretty much done creating some good random books right there. Let me show you a quick technique to go ahead and create some more random books based on the ones that we have a little bit easier. What I can do here is I can select all of these books here, okay, and let me close the transform type in tool. I can use the mirror function to go ahead and mirror these guys and make some more random books. So let me see how to do that. If I were to take this and clone this and place it over here, you'd be able to start to see a pattern developed. You see, someone can scan this very quickly and easily and see that there's a pattern here. Okay, it's a little bit hard to see, but it's there. So to kind of break up the pattern a little bit, what we're going to do is take these books that we just cloned over here, and what we can do is simply mirror them. So let's take these guys and let's hit the mirror tool here. And we'll mirror it in the x-axis. And we won't do a clone because we already did that. And we'll just hit OK. Then what I could do is I could take these books over here and let me go to a front view. Put these together so they're touching. And what I'll also do is go to the transform type in tool here and maybe scale them down a little bit just to make them look different. And there we go. Okay. So now it doesn't look like there's a pattern anymore. It's a little bit harder to see. Okay, so I'm going to say I'm happy with that many books. Okay. And the next thing I'm going to do is export this out. I need to take all these books and I need to export them out so I can bring them back into my other scene where I have my house set up, and I can start placing these books on the shelves where they're going to find their final placement. Okay. Now, before I do that, I want to go ahead and take all these books and I'm going to come up here to Tools and I'm going to go to Rename Objects, because right now all these books are simply called Box 1, Box 15, Box 28, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and change the base name here. I'm going to make sure I have Selected turned on. And the base name is going to be Books, or just Book. I'm also going to add a number, and the base number is going to be 1. And then I'll hit Rename. Okay, then close that. Now if I select my books, you notice that the names are a little bit more manageable now and make more sense. So it's book 32, book 15, book 6, so on and so forth. Okay? Alright, so my books are pretty much done. Now the next question is, how do I export this stuff out? There's a couple of key notes we have to make here. Okay? First of all, we can't just take all this stuff and attach it as one object. Why can't we do that? Well, because right now at this point, we're not sure how many books we're going to need for our shelves. So when we start placing these books, we want to have that freedom of being able to take these books as individual objects and being able to move them around, being able to clone them, and most importantly of all, being able to keep their pivot points for whenever we have to change a leaning book, or maybe lean it more, lean it less, so on and so forth. So that's very important. If we take all these objects and just attach them into one object, we're going to lose that freedom. Also, if we take all these objects and export it as an OBJ, we're also going to lose that freedom. So we can't export as an OBJ. If we try to export this as FBX format, we're also going to run into some problems. So basically, to make the long story short, what I'm trying to say here is, using the traditional methods we've used so far to export have worked in the past for other objects. In this special case right now with these books, we can't use the methods that we used in the past. So we have to come up with a new method. Fortunately, in 3ds Max 2010, we have ourselves something called containers. Containers are a tool set that allows us to accomplish the job that we're trying to do right now quickly and easily. So what's a container? Well, basically a container is just exactly as the name suggests. You take a container, you drop objects on it, you export the container out, and then someone on your team or you yourself can go in another 3ds Max scene, aka our scene with the house, hint hint, and then we can open up the container there and just start to pull out our boxes and place our boxes around and use them just as we had them here. They'll retain all the same exact characteristics they had here. So, for example, characteristics like the pivot points, even the color of the objects. If these things were textured, they'd retain their texture mapping. All that stuff gets transferred over. Okay, so it's like taking 3ds Max objects in a scene, making it into a little mini scene, and putting it into your main scene where your house is. So let's see how we can do that. First, I'll select all of these books. Okay, Then I'm going to come up here to Tools, and I'm going to go to the Containers menu here, okay? And we can access different container commands here. Alternatively, you can right-click on the main toolbar up here and get this sub-menu, and you can click on Containers. That'll open up a Containers toolbar, as you can see. And when I select these objects, a couple of these buttons become active. Okay, so let me close that. Let me do it by the main menu so you can see what these container commands are. So I'll go to the Containers menu, and I have a few options here. Based on what you're doing in your scene, some of these options will be grayed out, some of them will be active. After I select my books, I can actually go ahead and create a container from selection, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'll create a container from selection, okay? And it looks like nothing happened, but if I go to wireframe view, I can see that there's a new little object there. It looks kind of like a box when you're packing up stuff to move to a new place, okay? What I'm going to do is, the box is hidden right now inside of my geometry, so to make things visually easier on myself, I'm going to come down here to the Container Modify tab, down to the Display Rollout, and I'm going to take the container box size, and I'm going to increase it until I can see the actual container like so. Increasing that size, by the way, doesn't affect anything in your scene. All it does is make the container object here look bigger, so that way we can see it easier, okay? We can also go ahead and check on this label parameter so we can see the name of the container on the top. So I'm going to rename this container, and I'm going to call it Container Books. Okay, and you see the name updated here in the viewport, so we can see the actual name of the container. If we select the container, we can actually move the container, and all the objects in the container move around with it. If we scale it, same deal, everything gets scaled. And if we rotate, same deal, everything gets rotated. I think you get the idea there. Alright? Now, what we can do with this container is we can save it. As you can see here under the Save Local Definition, there's nothing there. We haven't saved it. So what we want to do is go ahead and save this, or you can hit Save As. Okay, it's going to save it in my Scenes folder automatically. And it's going to save it under a different file format. Normally, Max scenes get saved under the .max format. In this case, containers get saved under the .maxc format, C for containers. Okay, so what we can do is come in here and give this thing a name. For example, we can call this container _ books, and we can hit save. Now that we save that out, this file is being referenced to this file that we created, the containerbooks.maxc file. What that means is that now we can go into Max, create a new scene, open up a pre-existing scene, and we can open this container in that scene, and we'll have all our objects in that scene. So, for the moment, this is what we're going to do. We're just going to take this container. We already saved it out, so we're done. All we have to do now is, well, we're done with this, with modeling these books. Now we can move on to the next video and create other prop objects for our scene, and later on in the tutorial we'll come back and fetch these books.